All right, folks. Thank you all for being here. My name is Dan Dietrich, and like many on this call, I am a CCL volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby. With the Climate Change Coalition of Door County, we in CCL Wisconsin are happy to welcome you to Dr. Katharine Hayhoe's presentation today. First, I'd like to tell you the story of how today's event evolved. It all started this past January when Mary Smythe called me to talk about the possibility of co-sponsoring an online presentation of some sort with her organization and CCL Wisconsin. Mary is one of the leaders of the Climate Change Coalition of Door County. And we had gotten to know each other when she invited me to make a presentation for them a few years back. Since Mary's call on that January day, Jill Mitchler, my CCL Wisconsin co-coordinator, John Hermanson, the leader of the CCL Door County chapter, and I have had numerous Zoom meetings and email exchanges with Mary Smythe, Roy Tilley, who's the Climate Change Coalition's current co-president, and our co-chair, I guess is the word for it, and John, and Nicole Matson, who is the Climate Change Coalition's coordinator. The result has been that with the help of one Madeline Para, CCL's international president and a resident of Madison, Mike Kern, who is CCL Wisconsin Zoom expert, and others, the result is we're going to get to hear Katharine Hayhoe speak today. Two seconds, if you will, please, here. Always something. All right, I hope that's visible to you. This is Katharine Hayhoe, as you may be able to guess, and she will be our speaker. Okay, whatever that noise was, I hope that Jill took care of it.
I took care of it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Katharine's here already. Katharine is here. Welcome, Katharine.
Oh, welcome, Katharine. Delighted to have you. Starting at 11 or thereabouts, she is going to be speaking for 50 minutes, after which she will respond to your question for 10 minutes. She'll be using software called Poll Everywhere that allows her to poll us, her audience, throughout her presentation, and also allows her to gather our questions so she can respond to them. She will explain how to use it, so please expect to stay muted throughout her presentation. I sincerely thank you all for joining us today. I'm sure you're going to find this a rewarding experience. Dick Smith, who's a CCL member here in Wisconsin, and is, by the way, no relation to Dick Smythe, who's Mary's husband, says it's always a good idea for presenters to let people know at the beginning of their talks why they're talking. So I'm letting you know right now that the reason why I'm going to talk very briefly with you, you are undoubtedly here because you're concerned about climate change, but I'm here for that reason too, but also here to encourage those of you who aren't already members to join CCL and become climate advocates so that together we can keep this a livable planet. CCL has members.
I think we may have lost Dan.
Oh.
Perhaps I should jump in at this point.
Okay. Yeah, maybe he'll sign right back in.
I was just muted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know how that happened, but I got muted. Strange things are happening on Zoom. Isn't it wonderful? Anyhow, as I said, CCL has got members and chapters all across the US and in many foreign countries as well. We have nearly 200,000 CCL supporters worldwide, including over 6,400 here in Wisconsin alone. Most of us are members of one of our 23 Wisconsin chapters. If you live in Door County, contact John Hermanson of the Door County CCL chapter if you are interested in getting involved with his chapter. You can do that by connecting with him through the Door County chapter's Facebook page or by going to citizensclimatelobby.org. That is citizensclimatelobby.org, and then just clicking on Join CCL. If you're not fortunate enough to live in Door County, then you can follow that same process to join any of our 22 other Wisconsin chapters. We are a grassroots organization. We take a respectful, nonpartisan approach in our work with our members of Congress, the general public, and with one another. We reject racism, sexism, homophobia, and the partisan divide. Instead, we build upon our shared values as we work toward the adoption of fair and effective solutions to the climate crisis. Our goal is to get Congress to take meaningful climate action. From what climate scientists such as Dr. Hayhoe tell us, the fastest and the most effective and the most powerful approach to dealing with the climate crisis is through a carbon tax or a carbon fee. Therefore, we're working to persuade Congress to pass a carbon fee and dividend bill during their current session that would collect a gradually mounting fee from oil, coal, and gas companies, and then return the proceeds from that fee fairly to all American households to spend as they wish. How do we do that? By meeting face-to-face or virtually with our members of Congress, by phoning them or sending them letters and email messages, by giving talks in person or virtually about the climate crisis, by writing letters to the editor and using social media to spread the word about the climate crisis, and by gaining the support of business leaders, faith leaders, organizational leaders, and political leaders in our local communities. As a citizen of our democracy, you have enormous power. CCL's goal is to help you learn how to use that power by reaching out not only to your members of Congress, but to others in your community, people of all ages, all races, all genders, faith backgrounds, and political inclinations. I strongly suspect that Dr. Hayhoe may give us some guidance on how to do that. Is establishing a carbon fee the only thing we need to do to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis? Of course not. Among other things we can do, we could cut back on the amount of red meat we eat, avoid washing our clothes unnecessarily, install home solar collectors, insulate our homes, drive electric cars, and plant trees. Not only can we do such things as these, but we must do them. The fact remains, though, that none of these actions will have nearly as great an impact on the climate crisis as will persuading Congress to pass a carbon fee and dividend act. So if you're not already a CCL member, please join us in our work to keep this a livable planet. And if you are already a CCL member, thank you for your service to our planet, and keep on keeping on. Turn it over to you now, Roy.
Thank you, Dan. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody who has joined us. My name is Roy Thilley. I am a co-chair of the Door County Climate Change Coalition. I'd like to thank Citizens Climate Lobby for reaching out to Dr. Hayhoe and inviting her to speak today. We're just thrilled about it. Our two groups have different focuses, but are absolutely united in our commitment to the urgent need to address the climate crisis. You'll see our websites posted in the slides. We welcome volunteers, participants, and of course, donations to help us do our work and increase our work, which is important. Our coalition is a nonpartisan organization that's dedicated to increasing public understanding of climate change with civil dialogue. Climate change, many detrimental impacts, ways we can mitigate it and adapt to the changes that are already occurring. We seek to foster both worry and hope, and an understanding of the urgency to act at all levels, personal, community, state, federal, globally, to do our part. And that's what we try to do in this beautiful peninsula surrounded by Lake Michigan. We also are dedicated to meeting the challenge of moving this issue out of the partisan divide and to a debate on what actions to take based on science for the benefit of everybody's grandchildren. We do a variety of things. We have speakers throughout the year. We do a column in the newspaper. We work with schools, with libraries, with church groups, with the Nature Conservancy on tree planting programs with the schools every year, community composting, and we have over 125 local businesses that have signed our climate declaration, recognizing the importance of action now. Our signature event each year, if we can put up the slide on the spring, our signature event each year is a spring forum, which is speakers that come together for a day for about 135 people. We have substituted a citizen season of action this year, and this event today is the kickoff of 3 speakers. Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, followed on May 5th at 7 p.m. by Bruce Nilles, who is running Climate Imperative now out of Oakland, California. Bruce will talk about the urgent need to stop burning natural gas and electrify our economy. Bruce worked for 15 years leading Sierra Club's very successful Beyond Coal campaign. He's a University of Wisconsin graduate and a friend, a passionate speaker and a tireless worker to protect our environment. And then on June 2nd, Steve Vavris, a scientist at UW-Madison Nelson Institute, is the co-chair, will join us at 7 p.m. He's the co-chair of the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, a joint project of the Department of Natural Resources and the Nelson Institute. They are doing really important work modeling what is happening and is likely to happen in our state. And tomorrow on Earth Day, we launch for the first time and what we hope is an annual event called the Big Plant, where over 20 organizations throughout the county, churches, Rotary clubs, local governments, schools, and of course the Nature Conservancy will be joining us in planting trees over the next month. And we expect to plant more than 14,000 trees in the county. And then finally, the season of action will conclude with hikes this summer led by insect, forestry, and rare plant experts in different places in the county, focusing again on climate impacts. And then we'll have several field trips to a large organic farm to learn more about regenerative agriculture and sustainable practices. So you can go to our website, climatechangedoorcounty.com, to find the program, and you are encouraged and welcome to join us wherever you are. The list on the slide in front of you today lists the businesses and others who are supporting this program this summer. With that, I think we've taken enough time on our groups. I need to introduce, and I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Katharine Hayhoe and to move into our program. Dr. Hayhoe is an atmospheric scientist. She has taken the job of chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy. And I know that the issue of climate change appears throughout the strategic plan of TNC. She is also an endowed professor in public policy and public law in the political science department at Texas Tech. and works also as an associate in the university's public health program in the Graduate School of Biomedical Science. She's contributed to the many United Nations reports on climate, as well as the US climate assessment, has too many publications and too many awards for me to mention today. I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things to say, is Dr. Hayhoe is both a dedicated and highly knowledgeable climate science who's been working on this issue for well over 20 years, and is also simultaneously an extremely effective communicator. As the New York Times has said, one of the most effective climate communicators in the United States. This combination of talents is absolutely essential to fostering the understanding, support, and will and drive to act that we need to address one of the most, if not the most important challenges facing our world. This morning, my friend and climate work companion, Tia Nelson, sent me an article from yesterday's edition of yesterday's website of Sojourners magazine. And that article talks about the tremendous importance of Katharine's religious faith to her work on climate change, showing that climate and science and religion are not in opposition, as some seem to assume, but are united in driving our need to care for our Earth and our duty to generations to come. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you here today. So I am going to speak for a while on the topic that Madeline specifically requested, which is how do we use data and information to help have productive conversations? And then I'm going to be taking your questions at the end. So let me share my screen with you here. Okay. And throughout, though, I'm going to be asking you questions to kind of keep you on your toes. And the way that we're going to be doing that is we're going to be doing it through polev.com/my name, which is Katharine. Here's the thing, though. You have to spell it right. And my name has 2 A's in it. So on your phone, you can do this on your phone. You can do it on your computer. You can do it on your tablet. You can do it on anything you want. You have to go to polev.com/Katharine. And if it asks for your name, just push skip. You don't have to put in your name. And when you get there, you will get your first question. Your first question is, where are you joining from? Now, if you are not in Wisconsin, that is totally fine. Just click off the map in the direction where you are. I realize it's a bit hard to click south where I am in Texas, but you can probably manage it. So just click wherever you are around here. Okay, looks like we've got people figuring this out. All right, we have some people joining from Michigan, it looks like, or from Illinois, actually. So one from Minnesota, a bunch from Wisconsin. Oh, a lot of people from Dane County, a lot of you from Madison. All right. So this is how it works. And at the end, this is how you get to ask me questions too. And not only do you ask questions, but you can upvote the questions that you most want me to answer. So keep your phone handy or keep this window open on your computer because we're going to be going back here a few times as I talk. But now I wanted to start with data. And often when we look at the data, it's really helpful, I find, to look at public opinion. What are people actually thinking? The Yale program on climate communication has these great maps, and you can zoom in on by congressional district or by county. Isn't that interesting? So you can see Wisconsin there, you can see Dane County there. It's a bit darker orange than the rest of them. I'm pretty sure that's it. But you can go to these later. If you just go to Google and you just Google Yale climate opinion maps, just Google that, and then this will pop right up. When you go there, it turns out that most people do agree that global warming is happening. 72% of people across the country. Anywhere that is orange means more than 50% of people said yes. Anywhere that's blue means less than 50% of people said yes. And of course, the darker orange, the more people said yes, the darker blue, the less people said yes. So it turns out that most people think it's happening. And then most people think it will harm plants and animals. And most people agree it will harm future generations. You might think it's the same map, but it's not. It's a different map, same numbers. And even most people, we're getting a bit lower here, even most people agree that it will harm people in developing countries. So in other words, not us, but people who live over there. So most people are okay with the idea that it's real and it will harm plants and animals, people in the future, and people who live far away from us. When we start saying, will it harm people in the US, we get down to 61%. And then we say, is it caused by human activities? All of a sudden we drop to 57%. Remember, we started off in the 70s, and you see a lot of blue appearing around the country, even some blue counties in Wisconsin, as you can see. Definitely some in Michigan and some in Minnesota as well. So at this point, we were like, okay, well, if people agree that it's real and it affects plants and animals and people in the future and people in developing countries, but they're starting to get stuck on the science, clearly we have a problem. And if you look, this is a new survey that actually just came out a couple of months ago from University of Oxford, and they looked at whether people agree that climate change is urgent, if it's an emergency, and they ranked it by country. And you can see that the United States is right there with Russia and Algeria and Brazil. Other countries that are known as, rich countries where people are well educated, they're up at the top. You've got the United Kingdom at the top. You've got Japan, France, Germany, South Africa, Canada. You've got the Philippines up there too. You've also have Australia. So you have all of these countries up at the top, and then you have the US down here. So often at this point, what we think is, surely people don't understand the science well enough. And if they just understood the science better, we would get over the problem that we have, right? And this is actually a little cartoon from one of our most popular global weirding episodes. If you have not heard of global weirding, or if you have, but you have not subscribed to it, go ahead and do that now. You can do that in a browser window. You just type in globalweirdingseries.com, or you could just Google global weirding, it'd probably pop up. And you can subscribe on YouTube. And we are actually just finishing the scripts for the new season this week. Global weirding is actually partly supported by CCL. So go ahead to globalweirdingseries.com, click to subscribe, and that way, as soon as the new episodes come out later this year, you will be the first person to get them. But one of our most popular episodes is people just don't understand the science, right? And if that's the case, well, we need to give them more science. And there's a lot of science we could give them. When you go to Google Scholar, which indexes all of the different scientific studies that have been done over the last few decades, and you type in climate change, there are 2.6 million results, 2.6 million scientific studies on climate change. We know that there are 6 IPCC assessments, a new one's coming out next year. We know that there are 4 national climate assessments, and the last one was so big that they had to divide it into 2 pieces. The first part, which I was a lead author on, was 500 pages, and it talks all about the science. And the second part, which I was also a lead author on, talks about climate change impacts by region, including the Midwest, and climate change impacts by sector, including things like health and water and infrastructure and transportation and rural communities and cities. That one was 1,600 pages. So when you talk about the facts, we have the facts. Not only do we have the facts, but scientists are doing their best to communicate the facts. There was a world scientist warning of a climate emergency published last January, signed by 11,000 scientists, including me. The science has been studied for multiple centuries. We've known that digging up coal was adding heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere since the 1850s. We've known that those gases would trap heat also since the 1850s. We've known exactly how much the planet would warm since the 1890s. We've known that the planet was already warming since the 1930s. We have known this stuff for a really long time. And yet, here we are. As of last February, this data is from last February, they asked people, what do you think about different issues that are kind of hot button political issues like immigration, race, poverty, budget deficit, crime, drug addiction, guns? climate change and environmental protection, right? Yeah, those are on the list. And then they ranked them by how far apart people were based on what? Not based on their education, not based on how much they know about science, simply how far people were based on which political party they affiliated with. And it turns out that climate change and environmental protection were at the very top of the most politically divisive issues in the country. The width of the gray bar shows how far apart Republicans and Democrats are on a given issue. Well, then, of course, after February, what happened? Something called a global pandemic happened. And as you can imagine, the global pandemic, as well as the ongoing and increasing issues of Black Lives Matter, these two things rearranged this list. So by the time we got to August last year, things had changed. But how much had they changed? Well, just to give you a little hint before I show you what we look like in August, remember I left off on this map, right? 57% of people think global warming is mostly caused by humans. And this is the map where we would say, well, surely they just need more science, they just need more information. Well, what happens when we take this map and we divide it out by what people in the red dot think and what people in the blue dot think? What happens when we take this exact map and we divide it out? Take a guess. I'll show you. This is the same data divided by Republicans and Democrats. So you can see that it is not a case that science education is the problem. We're showing results here by congressional district. It is a case that we are divided based on what? Based on politics. In November, the Pew Foundation released a study showing that America is exceptional in the nature of its political divide of any other country in the world. And the Beyond Conflict Institute released a report in last June, where they talked about how increasingly Americans who view themselves as either Democrat or Republican view each other less as fellow citizens and more as enemies who represent a profound threat to their identities. When this mindset develops, compromise with the other side is viewed as weakness or betrayal. So as COVID rolled around the world, what do you think happened? You can probably guess. This is the same survey done in August, but this time it's not ranked by the width of the gray bar. So it's ranked by the total number of people who agree it's important. So I'm going to highlight the three widest gray bars, starting with number 3. Number 3 is COVID. Number 2 is race and ethnic inequality. And what's number 1? It's still climate change, still. As climate scientists, it was really not surprising to see that COVID was so rapidly politicized. In fact, this is one of my favorite cartoons. Here you have medical professionals saying, as long as we just provide the facts to the American people, surely they'll know exactly what they're supposed to do about COVID. And then over there, you have the climate scientists. We've been trying this already for 50 years. Look how it's going. Why is this happening? Why is it that the simple numbers that a thermometer is giving us are becoming politicized? Well, neuroscience and social science has some of the answers. This is Tali Sharot. She's a neuroscientist. And in a really good book that she wrote called The Influential Mind, she talks about how our brains are programmed to get a kick out of information. But when we give people new information, they typically only accept it if they already believe it. If it contradicts what they believe, their brain shuts off. And social scientist Dan Kahan from Yale shows that it goes even further. He said in a study he did 8 years ago now, he found that people with the highest degree of science literacy were not most concerned about climate change. They were most polarized. And he went on to actually show data. Here's the data. So he asked people, is there solid evidence of recent global warming due mostly to human activity like burning fossil fuels? And then he developed this measure, which he called ordinary science intelligence, which is a measure simply of how good people are at understanding statistics, data, scientific results. That's all. He found that overall, the higher people scored on this ordinary science intelligence index, the more likely they were to say yes to this question, that's the correct answer. But it's a pretty weak correlation. You only go from about a 35% chance of saying yes up to a 60% chance of saying yes. That's not a big change. Well, so then he took the same data and he divided it in half based on what? You can probably guess, right? He divided it in half based on political affiliation. And this is what he found. He found that the smarter we are, the better we are at what social scientists call motivated reasoning. What is motivated reasoning? Motivated reasoning is we want to show why what we already think is true. So the smarter we are, the better we are at out arguing the devil, so to speak. If somebody says, oh, climate change is real, and we don't think it is, rather than using our smarts to understand the information they've given us, instead, what we do is we just apply our considerable intelligence to proving why we're right. Now, I want to actually give you a real life example of this because this is really important to show why this does not work. In other words, just giving people more information. You may be following me already on Facebook. If you aren't, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. And on Facebook, we get a lot of comments. Most of them are great comments. Some, a lot of people asking questions. But of course, we also get what? We get people who are very conservative and probably quite smart. And they are posting information that is not correct. So when they do that, because I'm a scientist, I typically say, that's not correct. And there was this one man who did this called Ted just yesterday. He posted something that was not correct. And so I said, because on Facebook, there's really not too much you can do with a person. I said, that is incorrect. Please use this resource. And I gave him a resource to update your understanding before commenting on this topic again. So he replied with a very detailed, this is not right because I have done the calculations and da-da-da. And I said, I'm sorry, Ted, that is not right. Is there a reason you could not use the resource I gave you to update your understanding? If not, please do so. And he replied and he said, I don't trust that resource. If I do the calculations myself, and I'm like, the resource was a National Academy of Sciences report written by some of the top scientists in the world. But Ted was not willing to literally even click on it. Why not? Because it might contradict his personal opinions, which were directly tied to his sense of identity and who he was. So that is why giving people more information on the science is not going to change their minds. Did I think that it was going to change Ted's mind? No. So why did I respond to him once? I responded to him once because other people were watching. And then I responded again to simply say, use the resource. And once he couldn't, I blocked him because there was no constructive way of communicating with him. All right, back to our slides. So as neuroscientist Tali Sharot continues, she says, the wealth of information available makes us actually, on the internet she's talking about, makes us actually more resistant to change because it's so easy to find a YouTube video or a website that shows us that we're right. And even worse, the more we're exposed to contradictory information and opinions, polarization expands with time as people get more and more information. So here's what we do. But before I explain what we do, I want to ask you a question. Ready? So go back to pollev.com/myname, Katharine, and go ahead and, if you haven't done that, pick up your phone or your browser window. And I want you to answer this question by picking A, B, C, D, E, or F. When it comes to climate change, what do you feel like most? Do you feel curious, concerned? Do you feel worried or alarmed? Do you feel scared, or do you feel angry? Now, for some reason, sometimes, oh, there we go. Got the answers now. Okay. So we've got curious, concerned, worried, alarmed, scared, and angry. Okay. So most people would fall into the categories of B, C, D, E, or F. We are concerned, worried, alarmed, scared, or angry. And believe me, I'm a climate scientist and I completely understand. I personally cycle through every single one of the emotions on this list. So here's the thing. Climate changes and we get worried, we get concerned, we get alarmed, we get scared, we get angry. So what do we typically do when we see people who aren't as worried as we are? We say, well, you clearly don't know how bad it is. So I'm just going to load up and dump all the scary information on you that I've been collecting, and there's a whole lot of it, and it's all real. I'm going to load up and dump that on you. And then you'll be as worried as I am. And then you'll support climate action. Well, here's what neuroscience says. As humans, that does not work if we didn't already think that this is something we should be worried about. What happens, in fact, is if we dump more scary data on people, people reject it even more, and inaction results. Inaction. And going back to the neuroscience, fear and anxiety cause us as humans, and she wasn't even talking about climate change here, she's just talking about in general, but I think it directly relates to climate change. Fear and anxiety will cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. Isn't that amazing? So our instinct, what we often think to do when we feel worried, anxious, scared, even angry about climate change, our communication instinct will actually lead to the exact opposite result. Dumping tons of more scary data on people does not help. It causes people to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. And that's what we want, right? We want people to take action. So how do we do that? Well, thankfully, there is an answer. How do we break this vicious cycle? It turns out that information is valuable, right? Our brains appreciate information. Information makes a difference in how we think. But sharing the right kind of information is what makes a difference with people. The real problems when it comes to climate change are that we don't think it matters to us, and we don't think there's anything positive that we can do to fix it. We left off here, if you remember, people who think it's, that the science is real, but this is not the bluest map. Then they asked people, do you think it matters to you personally? This is the biggest problem we have. The gap between 42% who think it matters to them personally and 72% who think it's real. That 30% gap is the biggest gap we have. The 30% gap between people who say, sure, it's real, and the people who say it's real and it matters to me personally. That is the most important gap. Why don't we think it matters to us personally? Often because movies, news stories, articles we read, they have pictures of glaciers or polar bears or Siberia. They don't have pictures of what's happening here to me in the places where I live. So this gives us a clue, doesn't it? What type of information would make a difference? Well, first of all, information about what's happening where we live. And how do we convey that information? By doing something that hardly anybody is actually doing, which is talking about it. Look at this map, it's even darker blue. Do you ever talk about it at least once in a blue moon? Most people say no. And here's the connection. If you don't talk about it, why would you care? And if you don't care, why would you ever do anything about it, right? So what do we talk about? It's not about loading up with all the scary facts and dumping it on people. That's not going to help. Oh, I pulled out Dane County here. You can see Dane County is actually doing a bit better. You're at 42% if you're in Dane County, but other places are quite low in Wisconsin. We have to address this issue of thinking that climate change is far away from us in time or in space, abstract rather than concrete, and irrelevant to our primary concerns. We agree it affects plants and animals, people in developing countries, people in the future. So what do we have to talk about? We have to talk about how it affects us here, and it affects us now, and it affects us in ways that matter to us. That's what we need to talk about, right? So we need to talk about why it matters to us, and of course, all the positive things that we can do to fix it. That's how we can use information to make a difference, the right kind of information. So just as an example, I want to take you through some sciencey information and then some information that really makes a difference. And I'm going to use examples from the National Climate Assessment. So if you go to the National Climate Assessment, there's all this sciencey information on how there's different future scenarios and different temperature change. If you show this to people, will it make them more concerned about climate change? 9 times out of 10, no. Not unless they're already worried. If they're already worried, sure. But if they're not, no. What does? Talking about what's happening here. Loss of ice cover on our lakes in Wisconsin. Deadly heat waves in Wisconsin will soar without climate change action. Call it a Wisconsin heat wave. Temperatures near 40 degrees Fahrenheit by next week, and this is in the middle of February. So what? If we answer the so what question, if we bring climate change close to us, geographically close to us in time, close to us in relevance, that's the information that helps people understand the first point, which is why it matters. Let me give you another example. We know that heavy precipitation is increasing. Why? Because warmer air holds more water vapor. And so the more water vapor there is in the atmosphere, the more there is for storms to sweep up and dump on us, right? So it's a clear connection between a warmer planet and more heavy precipitation. But if you show people these maps, 9 times out of 10, this won't make people more worried unless they're already worried. What will make people more worried? If we answer the so what question. So what is happening in the Midwest? So what is happening in Wisconsin? Do you know somebody who's been affected by flooding? Instead of viewing climate change as a distant issue in space or time, we need to show how climate change is here and now, and it's affecting us today in ways that matter to people who live in Wisconsin. We tie our personal experience in with this. Because today we are seeing climate change affect us. And there's a really interesting map, which I don't know if you've seen before. Let me show it to you here too. This is a map of the billion-dollar weather and climate disasters that have occurred around the US since 1980. And of course, these disasters happen naturally, right? So where does climate change come in? Climate change comes in by loading the weather dice against us. Today, we are seeing that year after year, we are setting new records of more and more billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. 2020 set a new record of 22 events in 1 year, which shattered the previous annual record of 16 events that happened in 2011 and 2017. Climate change is taking our weather dice and loading them against us. We always have a chance of rolling a double six, a storm, a flood, a hurricane, a drought, a heat wave, a wildfire. We always have a chance of rolling a double six, naturally. But as climate changes, it's like it's sneaking in, taking one of these numbers and then another and turning them into sixes, and taking another number and turning it into a 7. And all of a sudden we say, I live in Houston, Texas. We just had 3 500-year flood events in 3 years. How could that happen? And the answer is, climate change is loading our weather dice against us in ways that we can see here and now in the places where we live, in ways that matter to us. It's not about the polar bears. It's not about Antarctica. It's not about Greenland. It's not about Siberia. It's not about the future. It is about Wisconsin, the Great Lakes, the Midwest, here and now. And it is about the fact that if we don't do something about it, it's going to get worse. That is the type of information that helps people understand why it matters. So why do we care about a changing climate? Often it's because it takes the risks we already face in the places where we live and it makes them worse. We care about climate change because it connects to the things we already care about. I'm a climate scientist, and I don't even care that climate change is increasing the average temperature of our planet by 2 or 3 or 4 degrees. If that was the only thing that would happen because of climate change, who cares? I care about climate change because it literally affects the water we drink, the food we eat, our security, the safety of our homes, our economy, our jobs, our health. I care about climate change because it affects everything that is already at the top of my priority list today. But somebody else might have a different priority list. You might have a different priority list. Whatever it is that is at the top of your priority list and whoever it is you're talking with, those issues, their top 1, 2, 3 issues, whether it's their grandchildren, their yard, their pets, their job, the safety of their home, whatever it is they already care about is already being affected by climate change. So you don't have to make them care about it for the same reason you do. All you have to do is connect the dots to what they already care about and how climate change affects it. How do you figure out what they care about? You ask them and then you listen. So ironically, the first step to a positive, constructive conversation is listening. Figure out what they already care about. So I'm just going to ask you this as an example. I want you to give me one word here. And listen carefully. If you have to use two words, make sure you connect them with a dot or a dash, and you'll see why in a minute, because this is a wordle. So I care about climate change because it affects what? Give me one word here. What does climate change affect that makes you care about it? There we go. I care about climate change because it affects what? This is perfect. I don't want to see one word here. And I definitely don't want to see polar bears here unless polar bears are literally at the very top of your priority list. I want to see a diversity of responses here. And that's exactly what we're seeing because we're all different. And that's okay. It is totally true that climate change is affecting everything that you say. But for one person, their grandkids might be at the top of the list. For another person, social stability might be at the top of the list. For another person, biodiversity or kayaking or future generations or creation might be at the top of their list. The whole point here is that we already have every single reason we need to care about climate change, and so does everybody else. And those reasons are different, and that's okay. We are already the perfect person to care. And so we're not trying to change anybody's values. We're not trying to change anybody's priorities. We're just trying to show them that whatever is already at the top of their list is already being affected by climate change today. And that is very different than telling people that they need to care about it for the same reason you do. Does that make sense? All right, so let me put this a different way. Rather than the polar bear being on the iceberg, it's literally us. It's us that's on the iceberg. Our health, our welfare, the health of every living thing on this planet, we are all on the iceberg together. To care about climate change, we don't have to be, fill in the blank. People often say, oh, it's only those tree huggers who care about it, or those liberals who care about it, or those, save the whale people who care about it. No, to care about climate change, we only have to be one thing, and that is a human living on planet Earth, because whatever we already care about is being affected by climate change today. And in order to have a constructive conversation with somebody, the first thing we have to do is figure out what they care about, and then we connect the dots to how climate change affects that. I have had conversations with people that started by talking about knitting, or cooking, or gardening, or invasive species in the garden, or our kids, or the place where we grew up. We care about climate change because of who we are. So in addition to figuring out what other people care about, we need to do our own personal inventory as well. When I do my inventory, why do I care about climate change? Well, I am a scientist, true, but I also live in Texas, one of the most vulnerable states in the country to extreme climate and weather events that are getting worse because of climate change. I love the outdoors and I love winter, which is getting shorter and more unpredictable as it gets warmer. I'm a mom. I care about my child. I'm a Christian. I feel like we've been given responsibility to care for every living thing on this planet. So my list is different than yours. I want to ask you a second question now. And this question is slightly different than the one I just asked you. I want another word. And again, if you have to use more than one word, make sure you put a dot or a dash there. I want one word about who you are. I care about climate change because I am a what? Who are you that makes you care about climate change? I care about, and like I said before, I don't want to see the same words here because we're all different and we all have different reasons to care. And you can see the more people say a certain word, the bigger it gets. So why do we care? We care because we might be a teacher or an engineer. We might just be a citizen. We could be an environmentalist. We could be a scientist. We could be a biologist. We could be an educator. We could be a mom. We could be a dad. We could be a grandparent. We could simply be somebody who lives on planet Earth and is a human. Exactly. And whoever you are the perfect person to care. And whoever somebody else is, they are already the perfect person to care too, but they might be somebody different than you. You can see on this list, very different people, right? But you all care because of who you are. So when we're talking to people, who are they? How can we respect who they are? How can we validate who they are? And how can we show that who they are is already the perfect person to care about climate change? Now, we've talked about the first part here, but I don't want to end before I get to the second part. So I'm just going to introduce the second part a little bit, and then I'll take your questions. All right. So we've talked about why and how climate change matters to us, how we can talk about that by connecting with where we live, by connecting with things and people that we already care about and that we share and we have in common. But we absolutely need to talk about all the positive things we can do to fix it, because there's no point saying that this is a big problem and there's nothing we can do to fix it. And that's what CCL is so good about. CCL is fantastic about talking about solutions, sharing solutions, and showing how people can engage in solutions. So because you already know a lot of that, I'm just going to give you a couple of suggestions. So again, first of all, we can explain why climate change matters where we live. And when you look at Wisconsin, we can talk about ice fishing. We can talk about the safety of our water. We can talk about invasive species. We can talk about maple syrup impacts. Oh, I'm Canadian and I take maple syrup very seriously. We can talk about things that are very near and dear to our hearts, but then we can also talk about solutions. And in addition to talking about things that we can specifically do, which is very powerful, do not get me wrong, I'm only going light on that because I know CCL does such a great job at it. In addition to talking about what we can do ourselves, it's also very inspiring to talk about what other people and organizations are doing too, like big business. What is big business doing? We can talk about what's happening in our state. We in Texas have the biggest Army base in the US by land area, and it is powered 45% by clean energy, and it's saving taxpayers millions of dollars. If I'm talking to a very conservative person, I say, hey, the military is saving taxpayers millions of dollars by growing their own energy independently on their land. Isn't that great? They're probably not going to say no to that, right? We get 22% of our electricity from wind energy in Texas, and it's going up every year. We're currently the #2 solar producer in the US, and I think as of next year, the year after, we'll probably take over as #1. But you have stories that you can share in Wisconsin too. You've got all kinds of organizations. You've got all kinds of fantastic programs you could talk about. I just did a really quick search to see what I could come up with. And I came up with probably about 15 different stories that sounded really cool that I could read and that I could share if I were in Wisconsin. Like Organic Valley, which of course, you know, they make milk and things like that. They launch a loan program for clean energy projects on farms. So if you know a farmer, you could be like, oh, hey, there's a special loan program for you where you could grow your own energy. There's amazing stories that you can read up on, and you can share this information with people, and people will be like, oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. That's a huge part of what we can do in our conversations. I love talking about what faith communities are doing, and there's all kinds of stories there about what Lutherans and Baptists and Catholic communities are doing. I like talking about how clean energy is revolutionizing the lives of people around the world who don't have access to coal or oil or gas. They don't have those resources in their country, but they do have wind and they do have sun. And last year, during the pandemic, 90% of the new energy installed around the world last year was clean energy. Isn't that amazing and surprising? That's some good news that we can share. If you're looking for any more information on solutions, check out Project Drawdown. You can find them online at drawdown.org. They've got 100 different solutions to climate change that include restoring and protecting coastal wetlands, conservation agriculture, more efficiency improvements, as well as clean energy. They've got all kinds of good news solutions to learn about and share. So when it comes to climate change, the first step is to talk about it, because as that data I showed you, the maps showed, most people aren't talking about it. And if we don't talk about it, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we ever do anything to fix it? But not by loading up all kinds of doom and gloom and dumping it on people, but talking about what? First of all, figuring out what they care about by listening. Then second of all, connecting what they care about to how climate change is affecting it. And third, sharing positive, constructive solutions that they can engage in and other people are already doing too. So remember, I showed you this before. Climate changes when we get worried. And here's where we break the cycle. Instead of dumping scary data on people, what do? We engage in positive conversations, as social science researcher Matthew Goldberg says, that create a true pro-climate positive feedback loop, sharing how climate change affects the things that we care about in the places where we live, and positive solutions that we can engage in and other people are already doing. And what does this do? It makes people feel empowered. And when people are empowered, they act. And to go back to neuroscientist Tali Sharot, she says, our brain is literally built to associate forward action with a reward, not avoiding harm. So you need to reframe your message. And again, she's not talking about climate change here. She's talking about anything, but it applies to climate change, doesn't it? She says you need to reframe your message so the information you provide induces hope, not dread. Hope, not dread, is how people change. And we have a key role to play in that. Because as we talk about why climate change matters and what we can do, it changes what people around us think. And what people around us think changes our social norms. Our social norms determine what we think is the way the world should be. And as our social norms change, so too does our sense of what we can do. Efficacy is the idea that if I do something, could I make a difference? Our sense of if I do something, could I make a difference changes. And the more we feel like if we did something, we could make a difference, the more willing we are to act. This is like a row of dominoes. And what kicks over the first domino? What knocks over the first domino? When we have a conversation about why it matters and what we can do about it. That kicks off the first domino. So how do we have these conversations again? By explaining why climate change matters to us here and now after we've listened to someone to figure out what they care about, and by figuring out positive, constructive ways that we can work together to fix it. That is how we can fix climate change. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to take your questions, and here's how you do it. You already know how to use PolEV, which is great. Now you can type in a full question. You can make it as long as you want. You don't have to use any weird dots or dashes, just type in a full question. But here's the fun part. You can also upvote the questions you most want me to answer. So if there's a particular question that you most want me to answer that somebody else asked, you can go and give it a thumbs up, and it'll move it up the list because we have about 15 or 16 minutes here, and I will answer the questions that have the most upvotes. So go ahead and write your question here, and even if you don't have a question, go here and upvote the ones that you most want me to answer. But I'm just going to give our hosts here a quick opportunity. Did you have a question that you had prepared ahead of time that you wanted to ask me by any chance? You get first dibs at the questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Roy, you want to go ahead first? Go ahead. Okay. The question I wanted to check with you about is faith communities. How can we involve faith communities more in climate action? I know there are probably a lot of churches that are very concerned about climate, and yet you don't see very much action from them. How can we change that?
Well, people who go to church are just, they are human too. And it's by applying exactly the formula I just laid out. What do they care about? How does climate change interact with or affect what they already care about? And what are practical things that they can do? So the best connection with a church is somebody who shares those values and beliefs, who can speak specifically to what that congregation believes and how climate change relates. And then it is incredibly helpful to bring in examples of other churches. There's a great organization called Interfaith Power and Light that collects examples of churches from all around the country as to what they are doing. So you can actually bring in examples, and on my website, I have a frequently asked questions list on my website. If you want to go there, it's just my name, KatharineHayhoe.com. I literally have a list of about 10 things that churches and congregations and sanctuaries can do to take action on climate change. Interfaith Power and Light does too. And so giving people examples of what they can do is incredibly powerful, because often most people do care, they just don't know what to do. And so rather than trying to make them more worried and more concerned by dumping more scary information on them, saying, I know you take your faith seriously. I know you believe what, the Bible says, or whatever, if you're talking to a different type of congregation, whatever your scripture and your religion teaches. And I know that it says that we have responsibility to care for God's creation and to care for those less fortunate than us. Every major world religion has those tenets. So here are some positive, constructive things that you could do to raise awareness in your congregation to really make a difference. And you can take this template and you can apply it almost anywhere, but just make sure that it's genuine, that it actually starts with what people believe. You're not trying to force something on them that's strange or different. You're starting with who they are, and you're starting with what is important to them, and you're showing them, and this is key, that caring about these issues and acting on these issues makes them an even more genuine and authentic expression of who they already are and what they already believe. And everybody wants to be that.
Thank you.
As another co-host, can I just give you a question, Katharine?
You absolutely can. And the
Okay.
questions are building up here in PolyV. So we'll want to jump
okay.
there afterwards. I don't want to shortchange anybody who's been good.
Yeah.
But go ahead. You get the next one.
I just want to say that if you've had bad experiences and conversations in the past, how do you reapproach those people, or is it kind of just a lost cause?
It depends. So 7% of people in the United States are dismissive when it comes to climate change. And those 7% are the ones who bring it up all the time. They cannot leave it alone, like a sore tooth. And so they are posting on Facebook. They are starting conversations with you. They sometimes might even be picking fights or arguments. And so often when we think about having constructive conversations with people, those are the first people we dream of having that conversation with. And I have some very important news. It isn't possible. It is not possible to have a truly constructive conversation with a dismissive. You can have a conversation that at least doesn't end in a fist fight, and I've certainly had a few of those that did not end in fist fights. But did they change their mind? No. Did they get them on board with climate action? No. So the 7%ers are a lost cause. Like Ted, who commented on my Facebook page. He was a lost cause. How could I tell he was a 7%er? Because he wouldn't click a link. He would not click a link. So do not waste your time on the 7%ers, because you know what? If we've got 93% of people with us, we can move ahead. So that's what I would say specifically about that.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, so we have a ton of great questions here. I do not share my slides unless I have time to fully annotate them, and I literally do not have time to do that these days. So the slides are not going to be shared, but this was recorded. So you can go back, and I'm sure you're sharing the recording, right? Yes,
Yes.
You can access the recording at any time. Also, I wanted to give you two resources that you might not know about, actually 3 resources. I already mentioned Global Weirding, globalweirdingseries.com. Also my TED Talk called, the most important thing we can do about climate change is talk about it. I'm sure that you guys will send out the link to the TED Talk and Global Weirding later. And then I want to make you aware of one brand new resource, and it is my new book. Now, you can order it. You can't read it yet because it's not out. This is actually what they call an advance copy, and they gave it to me so I could find all the mistakes in it, and you can see that I found a lot. So we're just at the stage now where we're fixing all of those. But you can order it already. You can order it online at Barnes & Noble or Amazon. You can order it in your local bookseller, anywhere books are sold, in your local independent bookseller, many of which are doing, they're having hard times these days because of the pandemic. So if you have a local bookstore, you can place an order there, buy a couple of copies if you want, because you can give them out to people. It's going to be out in September. So this book has a lot of what I just talked about in it. But in the meantime, my TED Talk and Global Weirding have that. And of course, this has been recorded. All right. So getting to questions, lots of good questions. I love the question right here. Traditionally, communities of color have not participated much in environmental issues. Do you have any recommendations on reaching out to communities who have not to date cared as much about climate change? Well, here's the thing. Let's just rephrase that question based on what we learned today. Climate change disproportionately affects low-income communities, Black and brown communities. It affects the air that they breathe, the water they drink, the safety of their homes. They're more prone to flooding. Do those people already care about climate change? Yes. Why? Because of everything that's already at the top of their list. Do they understand that yet? Maybe not. So it isn't that they don't care about it. Many of them care much more than you do, but they just haven't connected the dots to understand it's a climate issue. See how we return that question around? So then what's the answer? The answer is not helping them care, because they already do. The answer is listening to their concerns, because they have a lot of them, and helping to connect the dots to how climate change affects every single thing that's already at the top of their priority list today. See that? There was a great article by Bob Bullard, who's often referred to as the father of environmental justice, where he talks about how climate change is a racial justice issue. There's other great articles. There's one by Yale 360 that talks specifically about how climate change and environmental issues disproportionately affect communities of color here in the US. So it isn't a case of moving it up their priority list. I don't think climate change should be on anybody's priority list. It's simply a case of taking what's already at the top of their list. How do you find out what that is? By listening and asking questions, and then connect the dots directly to climate change and directly to actions that they can take that might help short-term as well as long-term with both a changing climate and what's already at the top of their list. All right, this is good. I feel like we're going to this sort of question a couple of different ways, which is really important, because if anybody can get this, I feel like you guys can get this, and this can really make a difference. How do we help local officials see how climate impacts affect their need to plan? Local officials are great people to talk to. I frequently talk to local officials. And with them, it's really important to talk about local impacts, to talk about what's already happened here and now, right? What has happened in our city? What has happened in our county? How did that affect us economically? How did it affect us in other ways? How is climate change making those worse? And what are examples of ways that other cities have taken action to reduce those impacts? And maybe we could do something like that too. There's lots of examples out there about cities, and that's a fantastic conversation to have. In terms of solutions, I am a big fan of a diversity of solutions. There are solutions, a question here about regenerative agriculture. There are solutions that look at restoring ecosystems, that look at retaining ecosystems, that look at planting trees, that look at conservation agriculture. There's no one solution that will fix everything. There isn't. There is no one solution that will fix it all. But every solution has a part to play. Nature-based solutions that look at ecosystems and agriculture are likely going to be about 20 to 30% of the problem. And that's a big chunk or solution. Clean energy is going to be a big part. Efficiency is going to be a big part. Did you know that in the US, we are so wasteful with our energy, 67% of our energy is wasted, mostly as waste heat. We are so wasteful that if we were more efficient with our energy, we would cut our emissions 50%. So that's a huge chunk of it too. There's all these different pieces, and Project Drawdown, if you haven't checked it out already, is really good about laying out all these different pieces that we need and giving you lots of great things to talk about. They're so interesting. In terms of who's hardest to convince about climate change, I would actually say not hardest. I would say impossible. I literally think, and I mean this very literally, I literally think it takes a miracle to convince a dismissive person. And I'm not in the miracle business. I believe that I've seen a couple of miracles. I believe that they often require divine intervention, but it's not up to me to change a dismissive's mind. So the 7%ers, leave them by the wayside. Love them, respect them, leave them by the wayside. Move on to the 93% who might have questions, who aren't sure, who've been told things by people they trust that aren't true, who don't think it matters to them. Focus on the 93%. Do I have any suggestions on climate change information and data that is easy to communicate? Yes, Climate Change for Dummies is the subtitle to Global Weirding on YouTube. So our YouTube series, Global Weirding, is all about that. It's very easy to communicate. You can show the videos to kids, and it explains the science very clearly. This is a great question. And I was asked this same question by a reporter yesterday. And this is the question. How do we get media outlets to talk more about climate change and solutions, like local radio stations and local TV and local newspaper? I think that's a great idea. And the problem that this reporter said she was running into is people were just saying, oh, I don't want another climate change story. Why? because they saw climate change as a niche issue, as an environmental issue only. And they're like, oh, we only have so many pages or so many minutes to devote to environmental stories. We have to cover so many other things. Well, guess what? Climate change is not only an environmental issue. Climate change is a food issue, an agriculture issue, a water issue, a jobs issue, an economy issue, an energy issue. Climate change is a justice issue. Climate change is a religious issue. Climate change is a Wisconsin issue. So you could write 100 different stories. You could write a different story, actually, literally almost every day, that talked about a different aspect of life in Wisconsin that had some mention about climate change in it. They could be writing a story about ice fishing or snowmobiling or maple syrup production. They could be writing a story about farmers, about agricultural production, about clean energy on farms, about invasive species moving into the area. They could be writing a story about health and about air pollution. They could be writing a story about jobs and about Biden's infrastructure plan and what that means for Wisconsin. You could write stories about almost anything, and you could probably help people by providing some suggestions on what they could do, because climate change is not a niche issue. All right, so now the last two questions, and these are great questions. The second last question I'm going to answer is, individualism has been used to make people feel like their individual actions matter. Well, I would say that it's actually even been used deliberately by some of the big oil and gas companies to shift the blame. The ecological footprint calculator was created by two sustainability experts, but the carbon footprint calculator part of it was taken out by British Petroleum. They made and popularized the first carbon footprint calculator to make people feel guilty about their personal carbon footprint when they are one of the 70 corporations, they're one of the 90 corporations, one of the top 10 of the 90 corporations that are responsible for 2/3 of heat trapping gas emissions since the dawn of the industrial era. If corporations can shift the blame to people, they get off scot-free. So if you go to my Facebook page or my Instagram page right now, and you can find me easily because I'm just Katharine Hayhoe, you will actually see two posts on Facebook or Instagram. And actually, I think I have one on LinkedIn as well, where I talk specifically about the myth that individual action can fix climate change and the importance of us as individuals being, as Bill McKibben says, not so much of an individual. He says the most important thing that we can do is not be such an individual, be part of the system that uses our voices to advocate for change across the system. So check out my Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and you'll see a post specifically on that. But I want to end here with the last question, which is a question that I get almost everywhere I speak. For the last 4 or 5 years, no matter who I spoke to, no matter where they lived, no matter who they were, I would be getting the same question everywhere. And it was this question: what inspires you? What gives you hope? So I decided to turn that around and ask people what inspires them, what gives them hope. And I decided to read a lot of the science on efficacy and on hope and on fear and things like that. And what I found is that we get hope from seeing other people act, because that gives us a sense of efficacy, the idea that individuals really can make a difference, because we can make a difference. It's not our personal recycling that makes a difference. It's not our personal light bulb changing that makes a difference. It's not our personal diet that makes a difference. It's when we use our voices to spur change beyond our individual lives. That's when we make a difference. And hearing about that makes a difference. And then the second thing that gives us hope is knowing that there's a future. And the future for us is embodied in our children and our grandchildren. Not that we expect them to fix it for us, but the fact that they exist means that there is a future. And that is what gives us hope. So actually, that is specifically why I wrote this book. I'll hold it up so you can read the subtitle. It's called Saving Us, but the subtitle is called A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World. And this book specifically talks about where do we find our hope. And again, it's not on, you can't get it in your hands yet, but you can pre-order it. So go ahead to your local bookseller or to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, go ahead and pre-order it, pre-order a couple of copies if you want, and that way you'll get it as soon as it comes out. And by pre-ordering, what you actually do is all the pre-orders count as the first week sales, so you help to bump it up the charts so more people see it, which is exactly what we need to be doing, because people need to know that when it comes to climate change, there really is hope, because without hope, we're never going to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katharine. We really appreciate it. And we will have your book in every Door County library as soon as it comes out. And I know your presentation will help improve our programs. We have found the most popular things we do have been those about good things people are doing and companies are doing. That's what people hunger for. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you very much. And I'll put up this slide first, just so we can put it into a visual format for you here. We do appreciate your presentation, Katharine. It's wonderful, and I think we've all gained a great deal from it. We have a little 2-minute video, if I can dig it up here for you. And I will put that on screen share as well here, just 2 seconds. There it is.
Oh, Dan, I think you might not have optimized the sound.
Oh, okay, thank you. We'll try it again. Try it again with the optimized sound, why don't we? Hold on just a second. So I get for trying to do 2 things at once here. Okay. See if this is any, nope, wrong one. Thank you, folks. Be well.
Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
to everyone. Thanks for everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. And check out our season of action and our next Door County Talks. Zoom makes it easy for everybody to join. Good day. Have a great day.
I'll see if I can get the slides, by the way. I saw a question about Katharine's slides. So I'll see if I can get those, or just the video on our websites.
And the Yale slides and the maps, the interactive maps that she used are all available on the Yale Climate Communications sites. And you can play with them on that site, download them. They're easy to get to.
Thank you. Bye.